I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who wouldn't be invited to her own daughter's wedding. Then again, I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would own the venue where that wedding was taking place either. But life has a way of writing stories we never expected to tell. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Merritt Abernathy. For 35 years, I poured every ounce of my heart, soul, and savings into building Honeycrest Catering from a small home kitchen operation into one of New England's most respected event companies. What started with me delivering homemade quiches to local businesses expanded into a full-service operation handling everything from intimate dinner parties to grand corporate galas. I retired 5 years ago, selling most of the business to my employees through a carefully structured buyout plan. But I kept one asset for myself: Meadowbrook Estate, a breathtaking historic property on the outskirts of Burlington that I had purchased 15 years earlier when it was facing demolition. I fell in love with Meadowbrook the moment I saw it. The weathered stone walls draped in ivy, the sweeping staircase that curved like a river, the 10 acres of gardens that had once been the talk of Vermont society. It was crumbling, neglected, but I could see what it could become. I mortgaged everything to save it, renovated it painstakingly, and transformed it into the most sought-after wedding venue in 3 states. When I retired, I kept ownership, but stepped away from daily operations, leaving it in the capable hands of Marcus Ortiz, who had been with me for nearly 2 decades. Few people knew I still owned Meadowbrook. I preferred it that way, my daughter Grace included. The day Grace was born, I made her a promise while cradling her tiny hand in mine. I will always be there for you, no matter what bridges we have to cross. For 32 years, I did everything in my power to keep that promise. When Howard and I divorced after 18 years of marriage, Grace was 12 and her brother Alex was 15. Howard, ever the successful attorney, moved into a sleek downtown apartment and started dating a paralegal from his firm within months. I stayed in our family home, juggling school drop-offs and business meetings, making sure dinner was on the table even on days when I'd been on my feet catering since dawn. I never missed a dance recital, a parent-teacher conference, or a Saturday morning pancake tradition, even if it meant working through the night to finish a client proposal. "Mom, how do you do it all?" Grace asked me once during her senior year of high school. She'd found me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., finalizing menus for a governor's fundraiser while simultaneously hemming her prom dress. "You just find the strength," I told her, rubbing my eyes behind reading glasses that never quite corrected my vision after years of squinting at recipe cards. That's what mothers do. When Grace got accepted to Boston University, I was ecstatic and terrified about how we would afford it. Howard contributed his court-mandated portion, but it wasn't enough. I took out a second mortgage on the house, worked double shifts, and cut corners everywhere except on the quality of my business. I didn't want her to worry, so I never told her about the nights I ate leftover hors d'oeuvres from events instead of proper meals, or how I stopped heating the house except in the rooms we actively used. During her sophomore year, Grace called me in tears. "Mom, my roommate situation is awful. They party all night, I can't study, I can't sleep. I need to find my own place, but everything is so expensive." I had just landed the biggest contract of my career, a series of alumni events for an Ivy League university. The down payment would be enough to cover a modest condo near campus. "Let me help," I said. "I've been saving for something like this." That wasn't entirely true. I hadn't been saving. I had been planning to finally replace my 15-year-old car that made concerning noises every time it rained. But Grace's education came first, always. "Mom, I can't take your money," she protested half-heartedly. "It's not taking if it's freely given," I told her. "This is an investment in your future. When you're a big success someday, you can take care of me in my old age." We both laughed, but I meant it as a joke. I never expected anything in return. I just wanted her to succeed, to have opportunities I never had. The condo became Grace's sanctuary. I drove the 4 hours to Boston whenever she needed help, assembling IKEA furniture, hanging curtains, stocking her pantry with home-cooked meals I'd prepared, and frozen in individual portions. Once I arrived to find her sink backed up and her finals week in jeopardy. I spent the entire weekend with a plunger and eventually a wrench, YouTube tutorials playing on my phone propped against her soap dish, determined to fix it myself rather than spend money on a plumber. "You're incredible," Grace said, handing me a cup of tea as I emerged victorious but slightly damp from under the sink. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," I told her. "You're stronger than you think. But as long as I'm around, you'll never have to face these things alone." After graduation, Grace landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Burlington. The salary was modest, and Boston had grown too expensive. "Come home," I urged. "Stay with me until you get established." She lived with me for 2 years, during which time her career flourished. I made sure home was always a soft place to land, comfort food on tough days, a quiet house when she needed to focus, celebratory champagne for every small victory. When she mentioned she was starting to look at apartments, I could see the anxiety in her eyes about Burlington's rising rents. I had been setting aside a portion of every catering profit for years. Not for myself. I had simple needs, and my retirement was secure thanks to careful planning. But for my children. I had helped Alex with the down payment on his first home in Chicago, and now it was Grace's turn. "I've been saving for this," I told her, sliding a check across the kitchen table one Sunday morning. "For your down payment. That way you'll build equity instead of throwing money away on rent." Grace's eyes widened at the amount, $80,000 nearly. My entire personal savings. "Mom, no, this is too much. What about your retirement?" "My retirement is taken care of," I assured her, not mentioning that I'd scaled back my own plans. The Alaskan cruise I'd dreamed of taking would remain just that, a dream. "This is what I've been working for all these years, to see you and your brother settled and secure." After much protest, she accepted and found a beautiful condo downtown, with exposed brick walls and a view of Lake Champlain. I helped her move in, arranged furniture, hung artwork, and planted window boxes with herbs just as I had done at every place she'd ever lived. As I was leaving, she hugged me fiercely. "One day," she promised, "I'll repay you for everything." I kissed her forehead. "Having you happy and thriving is all the repayment I need." 3 months later, she met Ryan Matthews at a charity gala she was coordinating for her firm. He was handsome, well-spoken, from a wealthy family with deep roots in New England society. Their relationship moved quickly. Soon, she was spending most nights at his place, calling me less frequently, our Sunday brunches becoming monthly, then occasional. I told myself this was natural, healthy even. She was building her own life, as she should. I focused on my business, which was thriving, and on the ongoing restoration of Meadowbrook Estate. The grand old property had become my passion project, my creative outlet. I personally selected every paint color, every fixture, every plant in the gardens. I wanted it to be perfect, the kind of place where memories are made, where history feels alive. When Grace brought Ryan to meet me 6 months into their relationship, I prepared a special dinner. His favorite foods, which she had casually mentioned during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. I wore a new dress, spent extra time on my makeup, and cleaned the cottage until it gleamed. "Your mother's place is quaint," I overheard Ryan say to Grace as they pulled into the driveway. The slight pause before quaint told me everything I needed to know, but I plastered on a smile and welcomed them warmly. Throughout dinner, Ryan spoke at length about his family's summer home in Nantucket, his father's connections in banking, Circles, his own rapid ascent at his firm. He asked few questions about me or my business, though Grace occasionally tried to steer the conversation toward my accomplishments. Mom built her company from nothing, she said proudly at one point. She was catering governors' mansions while raising us single-handedly. Ryan nodded politely. That's very admirable. My mother was on the board of several charities while we were growing up. She always said a woman's true calling is to improve the world around her, whether through family or community. I saw something flicker across Grace's face. Embarrassment? She quickly changed the subject. As they were leaving, Ryan stepped outside to take a call, and Grace lingered in the doorway. He's a good man, Mom, she said almost defensively. His family is very traditional, but they've been incredibly welcoming to me. All that matters is that he treats you well, I replied, meaning it, and that you're happy. I am, she said, kissing my cheek. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Very happy. 2 months later, she called me, voice bubbling with excitement. He proposed. Mom, I'm engaged. My heart swelled. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news. Tell me everything. How did he ask? Have you thought about dates yet? What can I do to help? She laughed. Slow down, Mom. We're thinking next fall, maybe October when the leaves are changing. And actually? Her voice took on an odd, nervous quality. Ryan's mother, Linda, has offered to handle most of the planning. They want to make it a really special event. Of course, I said, ignoring the slight pang in my chest. But I'm here for whatever you need. You know, weddings are kind of my specialty. I chuckled, thinking of the hundreds of weddings I'd catered over the years, how I knew the rhythm of these celebrations like my own heartbeat. I know, Mom, and your opinion means everything to me. There was a pause. Ryan's parents are inviting a lot of their colleagues and family friends. It's going to be quite elaborate. Whatever makes your day perfect, I said. Just let me know my role. Of course, she said quickly. I'll keep you updated as we figure things out. But the updates were sparse. When I asked about venues, Grace mentioned they were considering several options, but nothing was finalized. When I offered to accompany her dress shopping, she told me she'd already gone with Linda and found the perfect gown. When I suggested I could handle the catering at cost as my gift to them, she gently explained that Ryan's parents had already contracted one of Boston's premier catering companies. I tried not to feel hurt. This was her wedding, not mine. And if her future in-laws wanted to shower her with an extravagant celebration, who was I to object? I focused instead on what I could offer: emotional support, excited listening whenever she did share details, and a growing fund that I secretly set aside to help the young couple with a honeymoon or future home purchase. 6 months into their engagement. On a bright spring Sunday, Grace finally invited me to lunch to discuss wedding plans in detail. I arrived at the restaurant early, a notebook tucked in my purse, heart light with anticipation. She was radiant when she walked in, her engagement ring catching the light. We ordered, and she pulled out a thick binder embossed with silver script. Our wedding journey. Linda has been amazing, Grace gushed, flipping through pages of color schemes, floral arrangements, and table settings. She knows everyone in the industry. She got us into venues that are usually booked 3 years in advance. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. Have you chosen one? A smile spread across her face. Yes, actually. We booked it last week. She turned the binder toward me. It's called Meadowbrook Estate. It's this incredible historic property just outside Burlington. The gardens are magnificent, and there's this grand old stone house with the most beautiful staircase. My heart stuttered in my chest. Meadowbrook. My Meadowbrook. The property I had saved, restored, poured my soul into for 15 years. the property Grace had no idea I owned. I managed to keep my expression neutral, even as my mind raced. Why hadn't Marcus called me? Then I remembered I was on a 2-week painting retreat in Maine, deliberately unplugged from phones and email. He wouldn't have recognized Grace's name anyway. She used Wilson Parker professionally, a nod to both me and her father. It looks beautiful, I said carefully. I think I've heard of it. It's perfect, Mom. A bit over our original budget, but Ryan's parents insisted. The only available date was October 12th, so we grabbed it. I can't wait for you to see it. I nodded, a surreal feeling washing over me. I can't wait either. We spent the next hour going through the binder. I offered suggestions where I could, drawing on my decades of event experience without revealing my intimate knowledge of the venue. It was a strange dance, pretending to discover details about a place I knew better than my own reflection. As the meal wound down, Grace's demeanor shifted. She closed the binder and fiddled with her water glass, not meeting my eyes. There's something else we need to discuss, she said, her voice taking on a formal quality that sent a chill through me. About the guest list. Oh? I set down my fork. What about it? Ryan's family. She paused, choosing her words, carefully. They're very particular about appearances. His father has political aspirations, and many of the guests are important business connections. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Do you need me to help coordinate anything? On our side of the family? I know it's small, just Alex and his wife, your cousins from your father's side. That's just it, Grace interrupted. Ryan's parents have expressed some concerns. About what? She took a deep breath. About certain aspects of our family being, in their words, misaligned with the image they're trying to project. I froze. I'm not sure I understand. They've seen photos of your cottage. They know about your catering business. She winced slightly at the word catering, as if it left a bad taste. They were hoping for a certain cohesion among the families represented. A cold understanding began to dawn. Grace, are you saying they don't want me at the wedding because I'm not wealthy enough? Not sophisticated enough? No, of course you'll be at the wedding. Her eyes darted away. But they've suggested, and Ryan agrees, that it might be best if you weren't. Featured prominently. They were thinking you could attend as a guest rather than being announced as mother of the bride. Maybe sit with the extended family instead of at the head table. The restaurant seemed to tilt around me. You want to hide me away? Pretend I'm some distant relative? It's not like that, Grace insisted, though her burning cheeks told a different story. It's just, this wedding is important for Ryan's family connections. His father is being considered for a state appointment, and many of the people who could influence that will be there. I stared at my daughter, this beautiful young woman I had raised, educated, supported through every triumph and heartbreak. And where will your father be seated? Front and center, I imagine? She had the grace to look ashamed. Dad fits in with that crowd. He always has. You know that. Yes, I did know. Howard had come from money, had the right education, the right accent, the right family name. I, on the other hand, was the daughter of a mill worker and a school lunch lady. I had worked my way through community college, serving drinks at country club functions where people like the Matthews were members. I see, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Mom, please understand. Once the wedding is over and Ryan's father secures this appointment, things will go back to normal. It's just for one day. Just one day. The most important day in her life thus far. The day I had dreamed of since she was born. And what exactly am I supposed to tell people when they ask why I'm sitting in the back and not walking my daughter down the aisle? My father had died years ago. I had always assumed I would have the honor of giving Grace away. She bit her lip. We were thinking Dad would walk me down the aisle, It's traditional, and She trailed off. He looks the part, I finished for her. Mom! I held up a hand. I wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to attend my only daughter's wedding as essentially a background character. No mother-daughter dance, no toast, no acknowledgement of our relationship. Just smile politely from the shadows while your father and Ryan's family take center stage. You're making it sound worse than it is, Grace protested. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're ashamed of me, of everything I've done and been for you. That's not fair, she said, eyes welling with tears. This isn't about me. It's about Ryan's family and their expectations. I'm trying to start my life with him on the right foot. By cutting off the wrong foot of your previous life? I asked quietly. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. I love you, Mom. You know I do. This doesn't change that. It's just politics. Social politics. I slipped my hand from hers and reached for my purse. I need some time to think about this. Mom, please. I'm not saying no, Grace. I'm just saying I need time. I stood, legs unsteady. Congratulations on finding your perfect venue. I'm sure Meadowbrook will be beautiful in October. I walked out of the restaurant, made it to my car, and sat behind the wheel for a long time without turning. The key. The irony was almost too much to bear. My daughter would be married at the very place I had rescued, restored, and nurtured, just as I had done with her. And she had no idea. As I finally drove home, a plan began to form in my mind. I wouldn't confront Grace. I wouldn't create a scene or demand recognition, but I also wouldn't be pushed into the shadows of my daughter's life, not at my own venue, not anywhere. When I reached my cottage, I poured a glass of wine and picked up my phone. It was time to call Marcus at Meadowbrook. Merritt, he answered warmly. How was Maine? Are you back early? I am, I said, voice steadier than I felt. And I hear we have a very special event booked for October 12th. There was a pause. Yes, the Wilson Parker wedding. Prime fall date, substantial budget. I was going to call you this week since it's a full buyout of the property. That's my daughter Marcus, Grace Wilson Parker. She has no idea I own Meadowbrook. Another longer pause. Oh, I see. Marcus had been with me long enough to understand complicated family dynamics. What would you like me to do? I took a deep breath. Nothing for now. Don't mention our connection. But I'd like you to put me down as the primary contact for the venue. I'll be taking a very hands-on approach to this particular event. Of course, he said without hesitation. Should I clear the staff schedule so you can hand-select the team? Please do. And Marcus, let's keep this between us for now. After hanging up, I sat on my porch overlooking Lake Champlain, watching the sunset paint the water gold. I thought about all the years I'd spent ensuring Grace had everything she needed: comfort, education, security, love. I thought about the countless invisible sacrifices mothers make, the kind that go unnoticed, unthanked. I thought about the callous ease with which she had suggested I be sidelined at an event taking place in a building I owned. I wouldn't embarrass her. I wouldn't create a scene, but I would be there, fully present, fully visible. The next morning, I called my old assistant Diane, who had retired around the same time I had. She answered on the first ring, as she always did. Merritt, to what? Do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Diane, I said, how would you feel about coming out of retirement for one very special event? Depends, she laughed. Does it involve those horrible flamingo centerpieces the Johnsons insisted on for their anniversary? No flamingos, I promised. Just a mother reclaiming her rightful place at her daughter's wedding. Now that, Diane said. Sounds like an event worth dusting off my planner for. Tell me everything. And I did, my heart growing lighter with every word. The morning after my conversation with Grace, I woke up early, my mind already racing with plans. The cottage felt unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that follows after something fundamental has shifted. I made coffee and carried it out to the small deck overlooking the water, watching a pair of loons glide across the misty surface. I needed clarity, and the lake had always provided that. I pulled out my phone and dialed Diane again. After our initial conversation, she'd promised to sleep on it and give me more concrete ideas in the morning. I've been thinking, she said, immediately upon answering, skipping pleasantries entirely as she always did when excited about something. This isn't just about making sure you're properly acknowledged at the wedding. This is about teaching Grace a lesson about appreciation and respect, without, of course, ruining her big day. Exactly, I sighed. I don't want to embarrass her or create some dramatic scene that she'll resent forever. But I can't just fade into the background and pretend I'm okay with being dismissed. Of course not. No mother should be treated that way, especially not one who's done what you have for Grace. Diane had been there through everything, the late nights building, my business while raising my children, the financial struggles, the constant juggling act. She knew better than almost anyone what I had sacrificed. So here's what I'm thinking, she continued. You're the owner of Meadowbrook. That gives you certain advantages in this situation. What if, instead of confronting Grace directly, you simply ensure that the venue itself reflects your presence in ways that can't be ignored? I felt a smile forming. Go on. First, you personally oversee every detail of the venue preparation, the staff, the setup, the timing. You know what works best there because you designed it all. That means when Ryan's mother suggests changes or makes demands that won't work with the space, you have Marcus gently redirect them using your expertise, without revealing it's coming from you. I like where this is going, I said, already picturing Linda Matthews being politely but firmly guided away from her more outlandish ideas. Second, you curate certain meaningful elements throughout the venue. Photos from Grace's childhood displayed tastefully in the entrance hall. Her favorite flowers from when she was little incorporated into arrangements. Little touches that only a mother would know to include. My mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the antique locket with Grace's baby photo that could be subtly woven into her bridal bouquet, the lavender sachets she'd always loved that could scent the bridal. Sweet. And finally, Diane said, her voice taking on the tone she used when delivering her masterstroke, you use your position as owner to ensure you're not just present, but essential to the day's success. Perhaps there's a tradition at Meadowbrook that the most honored guest receives a special welcome from the staff. Perhaps there's a surprise element to the reception that naturally places you in a position of importance. I took a long sip of coffee, watching an osprey dive into the lake and emerge with a fish. It's perfect, I said. Subtle, but unmistakable. And completely deniable if confronted, Diane added. You're simply ensuring your venue provides the best possible experience for your daughter's wedding. How could anyone object to that? After hanging up, I showered and dressed with unusual care, selecting a crisp linen blazer and my good pearls. Then I drove the familiar winding road to Meadowbrook, my heart beating a little faster as the estate came into view through the maple trees. Marcus was waiting for me on the wide stone steps of the main house, clipboard in hand, expression carefully neutral. He was good at his job, professionally discreet to a fault, which is why I'd trusted him with Meadowbrook all these years. Mrs. Abernathy, he greeted me formally, aware we might be overheard by staff. Thank you for coming in on such short notice. Of course, Marcus. This Wilson Parker wedding is a priority for Meadowbrook. I kept my voice steady, professional. I'd like to review all the current plans and contracts. He led me to the estate office, a warm, wood-paneled room overlooking the rose garden. Once the door closed behind us, his formal demeanor softened. "Merritt, I'm so sorry about this situation. If I'd known Grace was your daughter—" I waved away his concern. "You couldn't have known. She uses Wilson Parker professionally, and I've kept my ownership of Meadowbrook quiet for years." I settled into the leather chair behind the desk, my desk, though I rarely used it anymore. "Now show me everything they've planned so far." Marcus opened a sleek black portfolio. "They've reserved the full estate for the weekend of October 12th. Ceremony in the stone garden at 5 p.m. to catch the golden hour light, cocktails on the East Terrace, dinner and dancing in the main hall. The Matthews family has already submitted a substantial deposit and outlined their specific requirements." He handed me several typed pages. As I scanned them, my eyebrows rose higher and higher. They want to remove the original chandeliers and replace them with crystal dolphins. I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Marcus winced. Mrs. Matthews was quite insistent. She saw something similar at a wedding in Newport last summer. "The chandeliers stay," I said firmly. "They're original to the house and historically significant. We can add additional lighting elements if they want more sparkle, but we don't remove architectural features." I continued reading. "They want to paint the bridal suite walls ballet slipper pink for the weekend? Absolutely not. We just restored those rooms with historically accurate colors." "There's more," Marcus said grimly. "They've hired Vanessa Choi as their wedding planner. She's already called 6 times asking for exceptions to our vendor policies." I knew Vanessa by reputation. Exclusive, demanding, and accustomed to getting her way. Just the sort of planner the Matthews family would choose. "Set up a meeting with her for tomorrow," I said. "I'll handle Vanessa myself." For the next 3 hours, Marcus and I went through every detail of the proposed wedding plans, identifying where to accommodate the Matthews' wishes and where to gently but firmly redirect them. I was careful to frame every change as an enhancement to their vision rather than a rejection of it. "Instead of replacing the chandeliers, we'll supplement them with custom lighting that transforms throughout the evening," I explained, sketching a design. "We'll start with their requested colors during cocktails, shift to warmer tones during dinner, and create a dramatic effect for the first dance. More dynamic, more memorable, and it preserves the historical integrity of the space." By the time I left Meadowbrook that afternoon, I had a clear strategy. I would work behind the scenes to shape the wedding experience, infusing it with meaningful touches that spoke to my relationship with Grace, while ensuring every aspect of the event was flawless. If the Matthews wanted to sideline me as a guest, so be it. But I would be woven into the very fabric of the day nonetheless. The next morning, I arrived at Meadowbrook early for my meeting with Vanessa Choi. I deliberately positioned myself in the estate's magnificent library, surrounded by leather-bound books and seated in a wing chair that had once belonged to a Vermont governor. The setting conveyed quiet authority without ostentation. Vanessa swept in precisely on time, a vision in a structured white suit and immaculate bob. Her sharp gaze took in the room, and I could see her mentally calculating its value and pedigree. "Mrs. Abernathy?" She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Vanessa Choi. Thank you for making time to meet. Marcus mentioned you're taking a special interest in the Wilson Parker wedding." "Indeed I am," I smiled pleasantly. "Meadowbrook is selective about the events we host, and we take a hands-on approach to ensure success." "I appreciate thoroughness," she replied, taking the seat opposite me and opening a sleek portfolio. "Though I should mention that the Matthews family has specific expectations for this event. As you may know, Richard Matthews is being considered for a significant political appointment. Many influential people will be in attendance. All the more reason to ensure everything is impeccable," I said smoothly. "Now, I understand you have some requests regarding our vendor policies and certain structural elements of the estate." For the next hour, Vanessa and I engaged in a polite but intense negotiation. She was good, very good, at her job, pushing for her clients' wishes while presenting alternatives when she met resistance. I respected her professionalism, even as I firmly protected Meadowbrook's integrity and subtly inserted my own vision. The chandeliers are non-negotiable, I explained. They're part of what makes Meadowbrook special. However, I've developed a custom lighting concept that will achieve the dramatic effect Mrs. Matthews desires while honoring the historical elements. I showed her my sketches. Vanessa studied them critically, then nodded with grudging appreciation. This could work. Actually, it's quite innovative. By the end of our meeting, we had reached a series of compromises that would satisfy the Matthews family while preserving my influence over the space. As she prepared to leave, Vanessa hesitated. Mrs. Abernathy, if you don't mind my asking, why this particular wedding? Marcus mentioned you rarely take such direct involvement anymore. I gave her a measured smile. Let's just say I have a personal interest in ensuring Grace Wilson Parker has the perfect day. Her happiness matters to me. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, her professional radar detecting something beneath my words, but she was too discreet to press further. Well, I look forward to working with you. It's rare to find venue management with such maternal attention to detail. After she left, I allowed myself a small laugh. Maternal indeed. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in wedding preparations while maintaining my distance from Grace. She called twice, both times starting with small talk, before awkwardly circling back to our lunch conversation. Mom, I've been thinking about what we discussed, she said during the second call. I know it hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But Ryan's parents are really set on how they want things to look, and it's fine, Grace, I interrupted, not wanting to hear more justifications. I'll be there as a guest. That's what matters. Really? The relief in her voice was palpable and stung more than I cared to admit. Thank you for understanding. It means so much to me. Of course, I said quietly. It's your day. After hanging up, I stared at the phone for a long time. Then I called Marcus with a new set of instructions. The bridal suite at Meadowbrook, I want it completely redesigned. Not the permanent fixtures, but everything else. New textiles, new furnishings, fresh flowers. I want it to feel like home to Grace. What did you have in mind? He asked. Cream and sage green, her favorite colors from childhood. Peonies and lily of the valley in the arrangements. And I hesitated, then committed to the idea, forming in my mind. I want to bring in some personal items, photographs, mementos, things that remind her where she came from. The day before the wedding, I made one final visit to Meadowbrook to ensure everything was perfect. The estate was buzzing with activity, florists arranging spectacular autumn displays, lighting technicians adjusting the custom systems we'd designed, catering staff preparing the kitchens for tomorrow's feast. I walked through each space slowly, appreciating how my vision had been executed. The ceremony garden was breathtaking, with copper beech trees framing the stone arch where Grace would say her vows. The reception hall gleamed, the original chandeliers now complemented by subtle lighting that would shift throughout the evening to create the atmosphere the Matthews desired without compromising the room's historic character. Finally, I made my way to the bridal suite. The transformation was exactly as I'd envisioned, warm, elegant, deeply personal. On the antique vanity sat framed photographs. Grace as a toddler taking her first steps, arms outstretched toward the camera, toward me. Grace at her high school graduation, both of us beaming. Grace and me at the grand opening of her first apartment, paint splattered on our cheeks from decorating together. On the bedside table was a small crystal dish containing the pearl earrings my mother had given me on my wedding day, which I had always planned to give Grace for hers. Beside them lay a handwritten note. For something borrowed, something old, with all my love. I hadn't signed it. She would know exactly who it was from. Most meaningful of all was the handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed. I had started it when Grace was in college, collecting fabric scraps from significant moments in her life. A piece of her first ballet costume, material from the dress she wore to her high school prom, a swatch from the curtains in her college apartment. I had been saving it for when she had a home of her own, but this seemed a more fitting moment to give it to her. "It's perfect," Diane said softly from the doorway. She had arrived that morning to help with final preparations. "She'll feel your presence in every detail, whether she acknowledges it or not." "That's the idea," I replied, gently straightening one of the photographs. "I'm giving her the perfect day my way." We were interrupted by Marcus appearing in the doorway, his expression unusually tense. "Mrs. Abernathy, we have a situation. The Matthews family has arrived for the rehearsal dinner, and Mrs. Matthews is insisting on a full tour of the property, including the bridal suite." My heart raced. If Linda Matthews saw the suite with all the personal touches I'd added, she would immediately question them, potentially alerting Grace to my involvement before I was ready. "Stall them," I instructed. "Tell them the suite is undergoing final preparations and isn't ready to be viewed. Offer to show them the gardens instead. The West Garden is particularly beautiful right now, with the maple trees turning color." Marcus nodded and hurried away. Diane and I quickly gathered the most personal items from the suite, the photographs, the note, the earrings, and concealed them in a locked cabinet within the room's adjoining dressing area. We left the quilt, refolding it to make it appear like a standard amenity rather than a personal gift. "Just in time," Diane whispered as we heard voices approaching down the corridor. Linda Matthews's crisp, authoritative tone cutting through, with Marcus's measured responses in counterpoint. We slipped out through the dressing room's second door, just as they entered the main suite. I pressed my back against the wall in the private hallway, heart pounding as if I were a teenager hiding from a strict parent rather than a 60-year-old woman who owned the building. "Exquisite," Linda's voice drifted through. "Though I would have preferred the pink walls we requested, this sage color isn't what we discussed." The estate's designer felt this palette better complemented the autumn foliage visible from the windows, Marcus explained smoothly. "It creates a more harmonious transition from indoors to outdoors, which photographs exceptionally well." I suppose that makes sense." Linda's tone suggested reluctant approval. "And what's this quilt? It looks rather homespun for the aesthetic we're creating." I held my breath. "It's a Meadowbrook tradition," Marcus replied without missing a beat. "Handcrafted by Vermont artisans. Many brides consider it good. Luck to have it in their suite, but we can certainly remove it if you prefer." No. If it's traditional, it should stay. Grace will appreciate those little authentic touches. She has a sentimental streak, gets it from her father." I nearly laughed out loud at that. Howard wouldn't know sentiment if it presented itself with a formal introduction and a business card. After they moved on to inspect other areas of the estate, Diane and I emerged from our hiding place. "That was close," she whispered. "What? Now?" "Now," I said. "We finalize our plans for tomorrow. I still need to decide what I'm wearing." The day of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of crystalline autumn light that makes Vermont famous. I woke early, too keyed up to sleep, and took a long walk along the lakeshore before returning to prepare. I had chosen a gown of deep burgundy silk, elegant, understated, appropriate for a wedding guest rather than mother of the bride. My one concession to my true role was a vintage silver locket containing a wisp of Grace's baby hair, something I had worn on special occasions throughout her life. I arrived at Meadowbrook 3 hours before the ceremony, parking my car at the service entrance where it wouldn't be noticed. Marcus met me there and escorted me through the staff corridors to a small office we had set up as my command center for the day. "Everything is proceeding according to schedule," he reported. The groom's party arrived 20 minutes ago and is set up in the West Wing suite. The bride and her attendants are expected within the hour. And the Matthews family? I asked. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews have been here since dawn, personally inspecting every detail. Mrs. Matthews had the florist rearrange the ceremony flowers twice before approving them. I nodded, unsurprised. And the special preparations we discussed? All in place, Marcus confirmed. The items for the bridal suite have been returned exactly as you arranged them. The reception hall is set up with the table assignments as specified. And the, special surprise for the reception is ready to be revealed at your signal. Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. I squeezed his arm gratefully. I couldn't do this without you. It's my pleasure, Merritt, truly. His professional demeanor softened briefly. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing is remarkably restrained, given the circumstances. I laughed softly. Well, creating a scene wouldn't help anyone, least of all Grace. This way, she gets her perfect day, just with an extra layer of meaning she wasn't expecting. Once Marcus left, I settled in to watch the estate's security monitors, which gave me views of key areas around the property. It felt a bit voyeuristic, but I couldn't risk being seen before I was ready. I watched as the first guests began to arrive, as the catering staff made final adjustments to table settings, as Howard arrived looking distinguished in his tailored tuxedo. Then I saw her, Grace, arriving with her bridesmaids, being escorted to the bridal suite. Even on the small monitor, she was radiant, her face glowing with anticipation. I watched, heart in my throat, as she entered the suite I had so carefully prepared. The cameras didn't extend into the private rooms, so I couldn't see her reaction to the photographs, the earrings, the note. But 20 minutes later, my phone chimed with a text message. The pearl earrings are beautiful, Mom. Thank you. No mention of the photographs or the quilt. Perhaps she hadn't noticed them yet, or perhaps she was choosing to acknowledge only what felt safe to acknowledge. Either way, it was a start. As the ceremony time approached, I left my hiding place and made my way to the stone garden, taking care to arrive just as the seating was nearly complete. I found my assigned place, in the 8th row, far to the side, exactly where a distant relative might be seated. I smiled politely at the guests around me, none of whom knew my connection to the bride. The string quartet began to play, signaling the start of the ceremony. The wedding party processed in pairs, Ryan's groomsmen escorting Grace's bridesmaids, all looking polished and camera-ready. Then came Ryan, handsome in his tuxedo, escorted by his beaming parents. They took their places at the front, Linda and Richard Matthews sitting prominently in the first row. The music changed to the traditional bridal march, and everyone stood. I rose with them, my heart pounding as I caught my first in-person glimpse of Grace on her wedding day. She was breathtaking. Her gown was simpler than I had expected, classic ivory silk with delicate lace overlay, elegant in its restraint. Her hair was arranged in a loose updo with small white flowers woven through it, lily of the valley, I noticed with a start. The same flowers I had included in the bridal suite arrangements, the ones she had carried in her first dance recital bouquet when she was 7. And there, catching the light as she moved, were my mother's pearl earrings. Howard stood beside her, chest puffed with pride as he prepared to walk her down the aisle. Grace smiled up at him, then her gaze drifted across the assembled guests. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I saw recognition flicker across her face, followed by something more complex. Uncertainty, perhaps a flash of guilt. I smiled gently, then lowered my eyes, allowing her to proceed without feeling my gaze heavy upon her. The ceremony was beautiful, the vows heartfelt. Ryan seemed genuinely devoted to Grace, his voice strong and sure as he promised to cherish her. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the gathered crowd erupted in applause. I clapped along. With them, blinking back tears that I told myself were simply a mother's natural response to such a milestone. As the newlyweds processed back up the aisle, Grace's eyes found mine again. This time she held my gaze a beat longer before moving on, her expression unreadable. During the cocktail hour, I kept to myself, accepting a glass of champagne and finding a quiet corner of the terrace from which to observe. Linda Matthews worked the crowd expertly, introducing Grace and Ryan to important guests, positioning them for photographs against the spectacular backdrop of autumn foliage. Howard chatted amiably with Ryan's father, the two men looking remarkably similar in their formal attire and practiced social ease. No one approached me. No one knew who I was, just as the Matthews had wanted. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the estate grounds, the guests were invited into the main hall for dinner. I followed quietly, finding my assigned table at the far edge of the room. I was seated with distant cousins of Ryan's, who spoke politely to me about the beautiful venue before turning to conversations among themselves. From this vantage point, I could see the head table clearly, Grace and Ryan in the center, flanked by their parents. Howard sat proudly beside Grace, while Linda Matthews took the place that traditionally would have been mine. The sight stung, but I had expected it. This was, after all, exactly what had been planned. The meal progressed through its courses, each one executed flawlessly by the catering team I had personally selected. The Matthews had chosen an elaborate menu, oysters and caviar to start, followed by truffle risotto, then a choice of aged beef tenderloin or butter-poached lobster. It was extravagant, designed to impress, and judging by the murmurs of appreciation from the guests, it succeeded. As dinner wound down, the traditional toasts began. Richard Matthews spoke first, welcoming Grace to their family with a speech that was polished if somewhat impersonal. Howard followed, recounting charming anecdotes from Grace's childhood, several of which I noted with irony had actually happened when I was present, not him. Then came the moment I had been quietly waiting for. As the best man concluded his toast, Marcus appeared at my side. "It's time," he murmured. "Are you ready?" I nodded, my heart racing as I rose and quietly followed him through a discreet daughter behind a floral arrangement. We made our way through the back corridors of Meadowbrook to a small antechamber adjacent to the main hall. Through the doorway, I could hear the wedding planner Vanessa announcing that there would be a special presentation before the first dance. "The staff of Meadowbrook Estate has prepared a unique tradition for our couple," she explained. "Something they do only for their most honored guests." That was my cue. I took a deep breath, nodded to Marcus, and stepped through the doorway into the main hall. A hush fell over the reception as I walked into the center of the hall. The lighting shifted, subtly, another carefully choreographed element, bathing me in a warm glow that made my burgundy gown shimmer. I could feel hundreds of eyes upon me, but I focused only on Grace, whose expression had transformed from polite interest to shock as she recognized me stepping into the spotlight. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady despite the nerves fluttering in my stomach. "For those who don't know me, my name is Merritt Abernathy." I paused, allowing the name to settle. No recognition from the Matthews family. They'd likely never bothered to learn the name of the venue owner. "On behalf of Meadowbrook Estate, I'm honored to continue a tradition we reserve for our most special celebrations." From the corner of my eye, I could see Linda Matthews leaning toward her husband, whispering something with a puzzled expression. Grace remained frozen, her knuckles white around her water glass. "Meadowbrook has stood for over 2 centuries, I continued, witnessing countless moments of joy, commitment, and family connection. We believe that every marriage is built not just on love between two people, but on foundations laid by those who came before. Those who nurtured, supported, and shaped the bride and groom into the people they are today." I gestured toward the wall behind me where Marcus had positioned himself beside a large object covered with a velvet cloth. At my signal, he removed the covering to reveal an antique silver frame containing a stunning photographic montage. Images of Grace throughout, her life from infancy to adulthood, nearly all of them with me at her side. There were audible gasps from the guests. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "This is our gift to the couple," I explained. A visual journey of how Grace Wilson Parker became the remarkable woman she is today. A reminder that while marriage creates a new family, it builds upon the love that came before. The images began to cycle on a digital display within the antique frame. Grace taking her first steps with my hands supporting her. Grace and me making Christmas cookies in our tiny kitchen. Grace at her high school graduation with me straightening her cap. Grace moving into her first apartment, both of us laughing as we struggled with a particularly stubborn IKEA bookshelf. Each photograph told a story of our relationship, of my presence throughout her life. Not a single image included Howard, or showed the wealth and privilege the Matthews family so valued. Instead, they captured the real journey. A single mother and her daughter building a life together through work, sacrifice, and unconditional love. "These memories," I said softly, "are the true wealth we bring to this celebration. The foundation upon which new memories will be built." I turned to face Grace directly now. Her eyes were brimming with tears, her expression a complex mixture of emotion I couldn't fully decipher. "Meadowbrook's tradition," I concluded, "is to honor not just the couple, but the path that brought them here. We wish Grace and Ryan a lifetime of joy, and hope that the strength they've drawn from their past will support them in their future, together." With that, I gave a slight bow and stepped back, allowing the images to continue cycling. The room remained silent for several heartbeats, then erupted in warm applause. I used the moment to retreat to the edge of the hall, where Diane waited with a glass of water. "Perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." From across the room, I could see Linda Matthews whispering urgently to her husband, her expression hovering between confusion and displeasure. Ryan leaned close to Grace, obviously asking questions. And Grace, my Grace, sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the photo display, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. The wedding planner quickly moved to reclaim control of the evening, announcing the couple's first dance. As Grace and Ryan took to the floor, I slipped out of the main hall and into a quiet alcove, needing a moment to collect myself. I hadn't realized I was trembling until I tried to take a sip of water and nearly spilled it. The emotional weight of the moment, of seeing my daughter's wedding while being simultaneously acknowledged and dismissed, had overwhelmed me more than I'd anticipated. I had just set down my glass when I heard footsteps approaching. I turned, expecting to see Diane or Marcus, but instead found myself face to face with Howard. "Merritt," he said, his voice low and carrying that familiar note of condescension. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze evenly. "Attending my daughter's wedding, Howard. The same as you." "You—" "No, that's not what I mean." He glanced over his shoulder to ensure we weren't overheard. "That display, the photographs, you've put Grace in an impossible position. The Matthews are asking questions she can't answer." "Questions like who? Her mother is?" I asked coolly. "Who raised her? Who sacrificed everything to give her the education and opportunities that made her attractive to their precious son in the first place?" Those seem like reasonable questions to me. Howard's jaw tightened. "This isn't about you, Merritt. It's about Grace's future. Richard Matthews is being considered for a state appointment that could open doors for Ryan, and by extension, for Grace. Why would you risk damaging that with this? This spectacle?" "Spectacle?" I repeated, anger finally breaking through my careful composure. "I didn't create a spectacle, Howard. I simply refuse to be erased. There's a difference. You could have talked to Grace privately, worked something out. I tried. She made her choice. The words tasted bitter. She chose status over honesty, chose to pretend her mother was some distant relation not worth acknowledging. Am I supposed to accept that gracefully? Before Howard could respond, we were interrupted by the appearance of Linda Matthews herself, her expression rigid with barely contained fury. "Excuse me," she said to Howard, her tone clipped. "May I have a word with this woman?" She barely glanced in my direction. Howard hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Linda. Merritt, we'll continue our conversation later." With that, he retreated, leaving me alone with the formidable mother of the groom. Linda waited until Howard was out of earshot before speaking. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "but I won't allow you to disrupt this wedding." I smiled pleasantly. "I assure you, Mrs. Matthews, disruption is the furthest thing from my mind. I simply wanted to share Meadowbrook's traditional gift with the couple. A tradition that conveniently features you in every photograph." Her eyes narrowed. "Do you imagine I don't recognize a power play when I see one? It's interesting that you see honoring a mother's relationship with her daughter as a power play," I replied quietly. "That says more about you than it does about me." Her perfectly maintained composure slipped for just a moment. "You're Grace's mother?" But she said. She stopped abruptly. "What did she say, Mrs. Matthews? That I was a distant relative? Some family friend not worth placing at the head table?" I kept my voice gentle, but I could feel a lifetime of suppressed rage simmering just beneath the surface. Or did she not mention me at all? Linda recovered quickly, her social training reasserting itself. Grace explained that her parents were divorced, and that her relationship with you was complicated. She mentioned you'd had financial difficulties, and might feel uncomfortable at a formal event of this caliber. The sheer audacity of the lie struck me like a physical blow. Financial difficulties? After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed. The down payment on Grace's condo alone would have paid for a significant portion of this wedding. "How thoughtful of her to be concerned about my comfort," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging within. "Though it seems she needn't have worried, since I'm quite at home at Meadowbrook." Something in my tone must have triggered Linda's intuition. Her eyes widened slightly as she glanced around at the historic building surrounding us. "You work here," she guessed. "That's how you arranged this display." I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. "Not exactly, Mrs. Matthews. I don't work at Meadowbrook. I own it." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible. Our wedding planner dealt with a man named Marcus." "My estate manager," I explained. "I prefer to remain behind the scenes, though occasionally, for special events, I take a more hands-on approach." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by calculation. I could practically see her reassessing the situation, weighing the social implications against the potential embarrassment of confronting me further. "I see," she said finally. "Well, that certainly explains the personal interest you've taken in the proceedings." Her gaze hardened. "But it doesn't change the fact that Grace and Ryan specifically arranged the seating and recognition to reflect their wishes for their day. You've deliberately undermined that." "Have I?" I tilted my head. I simply shared authentic memories of Grace's life. If those memories don't align with the narrative you prefer, that's hardly my responsibility. Linda's perfectly manicured hand clenched at her side. "Richard and I have invested considerably in this wedding." "And I invested considerably in Grace," I interrupted, my patience finally wearing thin. 20 years of my life, my savings, my retirement, everything I had, I gave to her. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about your investment in a single day." For a moment, something almost like understanding flickered across Linda's face. Then her expression hardened again. "I think it would be best if you left now." I met her gaze steadily. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mrs. Matthews. As the owner of this property, I have every right to be here. More right than most, I'd say. Her eyes widened fractionally. You're seriously claiming you won't leave your own daughter's wedding when asked? What kind of mother does that? The kind who refuses to be erased for the sake of appearances, I replied. The kind who believes that love and sacrifice shouldn't be hidden away like something shameful. I softened my tone slightly. I won't create a scene, Linda. I've made my statement. I've ensured Grace remembers where she came from. That's all I wanted. Linda studied me for a long moment, clearly recalculating her approach. You know, she said finally, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. When Grace first told us about her background, about being raised by a single mother who ran a catering business, Richard and I had our concerns. I said nothing, waiting for the barb I knew was coming. We worried about her upbringing, her values, whether she would fit into our world. Linda gestured vaguely toward the reception, where Vermont's social elite mingled with political hopefuls and business leaders. But she assured us you had taught her the importance of adapting, of striving for better circumstances than those she was born into. Each word was precisely calculated to wound, to diminish my life's work and the values I had tried to instill in my daughter. How interesting, I replied, keeping my voice level. Because what I actually taught Grace was the value of hard work, integrity, and treating people with dignity regardless of their station. If she's adapted beyond those principles, then perhaps I failed as a mother after all. Linda's smile remained fixed, but her eyes flashed with annoyance. Well, we all want what's best for our children, don't we? Even if we disagree on what that means. She glanced over her shoulder at the reception. If you insist on staying, I trust you'll keep your revelations to a minimum for the remainder of the evening. For Grace's sake, if not for ours. Of course, I agreed smoothly. I've said everything I needed to say. With a curt nod, Linda turned and walked back toward the reception, her spine ramrod straight, her social mask firmly back in place. I remained in the alcove for several moments, breathing deeply, trying to process the confrontation. There had been a time when a woman like Linda Matthews could have reduced me to tears with her condescension, her casual dismissal of everything I had worked for. But that time was long past. I had built something of my own, something beautiful and enduring. No one could take that away from me, not even Grace. When I finally returned to the reception, the celebration was in full swing. The dance floor was crowded, the bar busy, laughter and conversation filling the historic hall. I made my way to my assigned table, nodding politely to guests who now looked at me with new curiosity, some even offering smiles of approval for my presentation. I had just taken my seat when I became aware of someone standing beside me. I looked up to find Ryan, Grace's new husband, looking down at me with an unreadable expression. Mrs. Abernathy, he said formally, may I have a word? I nodded, rising to follow him to a quieter corner of the room. Up close, I could see the strain around his eyes despite his polished appearance. He was handsome, certainly, with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of privilege, but there was something unexpectedly earnest in his demeanor as he faced me now. I think we got off on the wrong foot, he began, surprising me. Or rather, we never got a proper start at all. I kept my expression neutral. That's certainly one way of putting it. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Grace told me her mother would be attending as a guest. She didn't mention you owned Meadowbrook, or that you'd be making a presentation. There seems to be quite a lot Grace didn't mention, I observed. Ryan nodded, a flash of something like genuine regret crossing his features. I want you to know that I never asked her to minimize your role in her life. That was a decision she made based on pressure from my parents, particularly my mother. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I appreciated the effort. Your mother has very definite ideas about social standing. She does, he agreed, then lowered his voice. But between us, she comes from nothing. Her father was a factory foreman. She reinvented herself when she met my father in college, and she's been running from her background ever since. That explained the particular venom in Linda's dismissal of me, the fear of recognizing a version of herself she'd worked so hard to bury. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Ryan straightened his shoulders. "Because I love Grace. I love her drive, her compassion, her authenticity, all qualities I now understand she got from you. And I don't want our marriage to begin with this dishonesty hanging over us." For the first time since the wedding began, I felt a genuine softening. Perhaps I had misjudged this young man. "What are you suggesting?" "A reset," he said. "A chance for us to start over, as families should." He hesitated, then added, "I've asked the wedding planner to make an adjustment to the seating for the remainder of the reception. If you're willing, we'd like you to join us at the head table, where you belong." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "And your mother is okay with this?" A wry smile crossed his face. "She's not happy, but she'll manage." Dad reminded her that alienating the owner of Vermont's most prestigious wedding venue might not be the wisest move for someone with political aspirations. I couldn't help but laugh at the pragmatism. "And Grace? What does she want?" Ryan's expression grew serious. "She's overwhelmed, embarrassed, I think, but also relieved in a way. Your presentation forced a conversation we should have had weeks ago." He paused. "She's waiting in the bridal suite. She'd like to speak with you privately, if you're willing." I hesitated. Part of me, the wounded part, the part still angry at being pushed aside, wanted to refuse, to force Grace to come to me, to make her face me in front of everyone. But that wasn't the point of what I'd done today. I hadn't come to punish Grace, but to reclaim my place in her life, to remind her of our bond. "I'll speak with her," I agreed. Ryan nodded, genuine gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you. I'll let her know." He started to turn away, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Abernathy, the quilt you left in the bridal suite. Grace wrapped herself in it this morning while getting ready, said it made her feel safe." With that, he walked away, leaving me to absorb his words. The quilt. She had recognized it as mine, had drawn comfort from it even while planning to keep me at a distance during the ceremony. The contradiction was so perfectly Grace, the independent young woman who still craved the security of her mother's presence, even as she pushed against it. I made my way through the back corridors of Meadowbrook, the route to the bridal suite, as familiar to me as the path through my own cottage. I'd walked these hallways hundreds of times, overseeing renovations, planning events, sometimes just absorbing the quiet history of the place when it was empty of guests. Tonight, though, each step felt weighted with significance. When I reached the bridal suite, I paused outside the door, gathering myself. Then I knocked softly. "Come in," Grace's voice called from within. I opened the door to find her standing by the window, still in her wedding gown, the late afternoon light casting her in a golden glow. She'd removed her veil, and her carefully styled hair was coming loose in places. She looked young and vulnerable and achingly beautiful. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, simultaneously, we both began. "Grace." "Mom." We stopped, shared a hesitant smile. "You first," I said. She took a deep breath. "I don't know where to start." "The beginning is traditional," I suggested gently. Grace nodded, twisting her new wedding ring nervously. "When Ryan proposed, I was so happy, so excited to share it with you. And then I met his parents, and they were so particular about everything, about appearances, about connections, about family background. And I didn't fit their image, I supplied. No one fits their image, Grace said with surprising bitterness. Not even Ryan, really. He just fakes it better than most. She crossed to a small settee and sank down, careful of her dress. Linda started asking questions about my family, my upbringing. When I mentioned you were a single mom who built a catering business, she got this look, this tiny flicker of distaste. I'm familiar with the look, I said wryly. She never said anything outright critical. She was too strategic for that. She'd just make these comments about how brave single mothers are, about how impressive it is when people overcome humble beginnings. Grace's voice hardened. Then came the wedding planning, and suddenly there were all these traditions and expectations about how things should be done, who should be featured prominently. And it was easier to go along with it than to fight, I guessed. She nodded, miserably. I told myself it was just one day, that it didn't really matter where you sat or whether you were announced as mother of the bride, as long as you were there. She looked up at me, eyes swimming. I know how wrong that was now. How much it must have hurt you. It did hurt, I acknowledged quietly. Not because I need recognition or a place of honor, but because it felt like you were ashamed of me. Of us. I was never ashamed of you, Grace insisted, a tear spilling down her cheek. I was ashamed of myself. For not being stronger, for caring so much what these people thought, for letting their values become mine, even for a moment. She stood and crossed to where I still stood by the door, taking my hands in hers. Then I saw the quilt this morning, the one you've been working on for years, the one with scraps from every important moment of my life. And I put on Grandma's pearl earrings, and I felt so loved, so supported. Even though I'd pushed you away. Her voice broke, and I found myself pulling her into my arms as I had done countless times throughout her life. When she scraped her knee, when her first boyfriend broke her heart, when she didn't get the college scholarship she'd been counting on. Then came your presentation, she continued, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Those photographs, that beautiful frame. Everyone could see. Everyone knew. What you've been to me. What we've been to each other. She pulled back to look at me. How did you do that? How did you organize all of that? I took a deep breath. It was time for my own confession. Grace, there's something you should know about Meadowbrook. I gestured to the beautiful room around us. This estate, I own it. I've owned it for 15 years. Her eyes widened in shock. What? But how? Why didn't you ever tell me? I bought it when it was facing demolition, used the profits from the catering business to restore it. It became my passion project, then my retirement plan. I led her to the settee and sat beside her. I kept it separate from my identity, partly for privacy and partly because it was just for me. Something that was mine alone when so much of my life was devoted to you and Alex. Grace stared at me, processing this revelation. So when Ryan and I were looking at wedding venues, and Vanessa suggested Meadowbrook, pure coincidence, I assured her. Though once I found out, I couldn't resist taking a more hands-on approach to the preparations. A laugh bubbled up from Grace's throat, slightly hysterical. Oh my God, Linda Matthews has been dealing with my mother this whole time without knowing it. All those demands, those condescending comments about the venue needing upgrades to suit their standards. She was quite specific about wanting crystal dolphins instead of the historic chandeliers, I confirmed, my own lips twitching despite the seriousness of the moment. Grace's laugh grew, tears of mirth now joining those of emotion. And the pink walls. She insisted the bridal suite should be painted ballet pink for the wedding. I offered alternative lighting concepts instead, I said primly, then couldn't maintain it. We dissolved into laughter together, the tension of the past weeks momentarily broken. When we caught our breath, Grace wiped her eyes, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Mom, I am so sorry for trying to minimize your role, for caring more about impressing Ryan's family than honoring you. It was wrong and selfish, and I hope someday you can forgive me. I reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, just as I had done when she was a little girl. I already have, sweetheart. I didn't come here today to punish you. I came to remind you, and myself, of who we are to each other, of the love that can't be hidden away, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people like Linda Matthews. Grace nodded, fresh tears welling. Ryan wants you at the head table for the rest of the reception. He mentioned that, I said. Quite the diplomat, your new husband. He's better than I gave him credit for, Grace admitted. When he realized what had happened, he was furious with his mother, with me. Said he didn't want to build a marriage on such a shaky foundation of lies and social climbing. She smiled, weakly. Turns out he has a backbone after all. Good, I said firmly. You deserve a partner who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Grace squeezed my hand. I learned that from you, you know. Even if I forgot it for a while. I stood, pulling her gently to her feet. We should get back to your reception. People will be wondering where the bride has disappeared to. Grace nodded, then paused, looking uncertain. There's one more thing. She hesitated. Would you want to do the mother-daughter dance with me? The one we were supposed to have? My throat tightened with emotion. I would love nothing more. She smiled, then gestured to her tear-streaked face. I should fix my makeup first. I probably look like a raccoon. You look beautiful, I told her honestly. But if you want to touch up, there's a full set of products in the vanity drawer. I made sure of it. As Grace moved to the vanity, I watched her reflection in the mirror. My daughter, now a married woman, still finding her way, still learning what truly matters. I had raised her as best I could, given her everything I had to give. Today had shown me that while she might stumble, might temporarily lose sight of our bond under pressure, the foundation we had built together remained strong. Ready? I asked when she had finished. She nodded, taking a deep breath and squaring her shoulders. Ready. Together, we walked out of the bridal suite and back toward the reception. As we approached the main hall, I could hear the music and laughter, the sounds of celebration continuing without us. Grace paused at the entrance, her hand tightening on mine. Mom, she said quietly, thank you. Not just for today, but for everything. For being the kind of mother who wouldn't let herself be erased, even when I tried to do the erasing. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over me for the first time in weeks. That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We show up. We remember. We hold on to what matters, even when the world tries to tell us it doesn't. With that, we stepped into the light of the reception hall, hand in hand, ready to take our rightful places, in each other's lives once more. As Grace and I entered the reception hall together, a hush fell over the room. Conversations halted mid-sentence, champagne glasses paused on their way to lips, and all eyes turned toward us. For a moment, everything was suspended in anticipation, the collective breath of 200 guests held as they waited to see what would unfold next in this unexpected drama. Then Ryan stood from his place at the head table and crossed the floor, to meet us. The confidence in his stride and the warmth in his smile surprised me. This was not the polished, somewhat shallow young man I'd initially judged him to be. There was something genuine in his expression as he reached for Grace's hand, then, after a brief hesitation, for mine as well. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, I'd like to invite everyone to witness a special moment we've been waiting for all evening. He nodded to the band, who immediately transitioned to a gentle melody I recognized instantly. What a wonderful world. the song Grace and I had danced to in our kitchen on countless Sunday mornings when she was growing up. The mother-daughter. Dance? Ryan continued, stepping back to create space for us in the center of the floor. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. We had just discussed this in the bridal suite, but she clearly hadn't expected Ryan to arrange it so quickly, so publicly. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face, and I understood her concern immediately. Linda Matthews was watching from the head table, her expression a frozen mask of disapproval. I leaned close to Grace's ear. "We don't have to do this now," I whispered. "Not if you're uncomfortable." She hesitated only a moment before straightening her spine and squeezing my hand. "No," she said firmly. "This is exactly what we should do." With that, she led me to the center of the dance floor. As Louis Armstrong's familiar gravelly voice filled the air, we began to sway together, finding the familiar rhythm we'd established over a lifetime of kitchen dances and living room twirls. "Dad taught me to waltz for this wedding," Grace murmured as we moved. 3 formal lessons with a professional instructor Linda recommended. But this, just moving with you, this feels like home. I blinked back unexpected tears. "We never needed lessons, did we?" "Never," she agreed, her own eyes glistening. "We always found our way." Around us, the guests were watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine emotion. Howard stood at the edge of the dance floor, his face unreadable but not unkind. Richard Matthews looked uncomfortable but resigned. And Linda had risen from her seat and was making her way determinedly toward where Vanessa, the wedding planner, stood near the band. I tried not to let it disturb our moment, but Grace had noticed too. "She's probably trying to get them to change the song," she said with surprising lightness. "Something more appropriate for her vision of this wedding." "Let her try," I replied. "This is Meadowbrook, and tonight we dance to our song." As the music continued, something remarkable happened. Other guests began to join us on the dance floor, mothers with sons, fathers with daughters, grandparents with grandchildren. What had begun as a potentially awkward moment of confrontation had transformed into a celebration of family bonds in all their forms. When the song ended, there was spontaneous applause. Grace hugged me tightly, then pulled back with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes, the real smile I'd been missing for months. "Thank you," she whispered. We made our way to the head table, where Ryan had indeed arranged for a place setting to be added for me. As I took my seat beside Grace, I was acutely aware of Linda Matthews at the far end, pointedly engaged in conversation with Richard's business associate while avoiding looking in my direction. The dinner service resumed, the momentary disruption, absorbed into the flow of the evening. Grace introduced me properly to Ryan's friends from college, to his younger sister who seemed genuinely pleased to meet me, to colleagues from her marketing firm who expressed admiration for my surprise revelation. "I can't believe you never told us your mother owned Meadowbrook," one young woman said to Grace. "Everyone wants to get married here. There's a 3-year waiting list." "I didn't know myself until recently," Grace admitted, glancing at me with a mixture of humor and chagrin. As plates were cleared and dessert was served, a spectacular 5-tier cake that I recognized as the work of Francois, the French pastry chef I'd recommended to Vanessa, Howard appeared at my elbow. "May I borrow you for a moment?" he asked. Quietly. I nodded, excusing myself from the table and following him to a quiet corner near one of the tall windows overlooking the illuminated gardens. The sun had set, and Meadowbrook's grounds were now aglow with thousands of tiny lights woven through trees and shrubs, another touch I had personally overseen for Grace's wedding. "That was quite a statement you made," Howard said, his tone measured. "Which part? The presentation, the mother-daughter dance, or simply refusing to be invisible at my own daughter's wedding?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "All of it, I suppose." He paused, rubbing a hand across his jaw in a gesture I remembered from our marriage, a sign he was choosing his words carefully. "You know, When Grace told me about the wedding plans, about how you were to be seated with distant relatives rather than at the head table, I didn't object. "I'm not surprised," I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "You should be," he replied unexpectedly. "Because it wasn't like me at all, was it? To let something so fundamentally wrong pass without comment?" I studied his face, trying to read what lay behind his words. "No," I admitted. "Whatever our differences, you were always fair-minded about family matters." "I've been compromised," he said, so quietly I had to lean closer to hear him. "Professionally tangled with the Matthews family in ways that made it difficult to challenge their wishes, even when those wishes were obviously inappropriate." My eyebrows rose. Professionally tangled? He glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "Richard Matthews is the majority investor in my firm's newest expansion. The deal was finalized just 2 months ago, around the time wedding planning began in earnest. A very profitable arrangement for me, personally." Understanding dawned. So when Grace explained the seating plan, the way I was to be marginalized, I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, Howard finished, that it was Grace's wedding, her decision. But the truth is, I was protecting my own interests, and I knew it. He met my eyes directly. "It was cowardly, and I'm sorry." The apology was so unexpected that for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Howard and I had maintained a cordial relationship after our divorce, united in our love for our children if nothing else. But genuine apologies had been rare between us. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked finally. He gestured toward the reception, where Grace was laughing at something Ryan had said, her face alight with happiness. "Because what you did tonight, standing up for yourself, for your relationship with our daughter, it was brave. Braver than I've been." He shook his head ruefully. "It reminded me of who you've always been, Merritt. Uncompromising when it comes to the people you love." The compliment warmed me unexpectedly. Well, I couldn't very well let Linda Matthews rewrite our family history, could I? "No," Howard agreed with a small smile. "And it was rather masterful, using your ownership of Meadowbrook to ensure you couldn't be sidelined. When did you buy this place? I had no idea." 15 years ago, when it was nearly condemned. I mortgaged everything to save it." He looked around at the magnificently restored estate, genuine admiration in his expression. "You always did have vision." "I remember when you first started the catering business, working out of our tiny kitchen, and I thought it was just a hobby to keep you busy while the kids were in school." "I remember," I said dryly. "You suggested I join the country club's social committee instead, if I wanted something to occupy my time." Howard had the good grace to look embarrassed. Not my finest moment as a supportive husband. "No," I agreed. Though, to be fair, there weren't many of those toward the end. He didn't argue the point. "I wanted to let you know that I've spoken with Richard and Linda, made it clear that any continued awkwardness regarding your rightful place at this wedding would reflect poorly on all of us." I raised an eyebrow. "Risking your professional connection? Some things matter more than business deals," he said simply. "Grace's happiness, for one. And," he added, more hesitantly, "giving credit where it's due. You raised our children, Merritt. You built a life for them while I was busy building my career. The least I can do is ensure you're properly acknowledged for that." It was, perhaps, the most honest conversation Howard and I had shared in 20 years. I found myself surprisingly touched by his belated advocacy, even as I recognized it didn't erase the years of absent parenting or his recent acquiescence to the Matthews' social manipulations. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means something." We were interrupted by the wedding planner, who approached with professional composure despite the evening's unexpected developments. "Excuse me," Vanessa said, "but it's time for the cake cutting. The photographer is ready, and we'd like both sets of parents in the photos. Howard offered me his arm. Shall we? I believe we're needed at our daughter's side. Together, we walked back to the reception. Grace's face lit up when she saw us approach arm in arm. Dad? Mom? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I assured her. Your father and I were just reminiscing about old times. Good ones, I hope, she said uncertainly. Howard smiled. The best ones. The day you were born. Your first steps. How you used to fall asleep on your mother's shoulder no matter where we were or what was happening around us. Grace blinked in surprise at this uncharacteristic sentimentality from her father. Well, we need both of you for the cake-cutting photos. Ryan insisted all parents be included. She glanced toward Linda and Richard, who were already positioned beside the spectacular cake, their social masks firmly in place despite the evening's disruptions. As we took our places for the photographs, I found myself standing directly beside Linda Matthews. She acknowledged me with a tight nod, then leaned slightly closer. You've made your point quite effectively, Mrs. Abernathy, she said under her breath, her smile never wavering for the cameras. An impressive display of maternal devotion. I matched her photo-ready smile with one of my own. It wasn't a display, Mrs. Matthews. It was simply the truth. Something I've found is always more powerful than appearances, in the long run. Before she could respond, the photographer called for our attention, and we turned to watch as Grace and Ryan prepared to cut the cake. They looked so young, so full of hope and joy as they clasped hands around the silver cake knife. Another Meadowbrook tradition I had personally selected from the estate's collection of antique serving pieces. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced, the bride and groom will now cut their wedding cake, created especially for today by master pastry chef François Dubois. As applause rippled through the room, I caught Grace's eye. She smiled at me, a real smile, warm and genuine, and in that moment, I knew that whatever tensions remained, whatever awkward family dynamics we would continue to navigate, our bond had survived its greatest test. She was still my daughter. I was still her mother, and no social pressure or false narrative could erase that fundamental truth. After the cake cutting, as guests returned to their tables and the band resumed playing, I found myself approached by various wedding attendees, many curious about my connection to Meadowbrook, others simply wanting to compliment the beautiful estate. I answered graciously, neither hiding nor overemphasizing my ownership, enjoying the irony that the venue the Matthews had chosen to impress their social circle was, in fact, my creation. Diane appeared at my side, champagne flute in hand. Well played, she murmured. The mother-daughter dance was especially touching, not a dry eye in the house. Including Linda Matthews? I asked wryly. That woman's tear ducts probably dried, up years ago from all the Botox, Diane replied, making me choke on my own champagne. But even she couldn't deny the moment. I overheard her telling one of her friends that Grace has always had such a tender heart, wanting to include everyone in her special day. I laughed softly. Rewriting history already, I see. That's what people like the Matthews do, Diane said with a shrug. They can't acknowledge being outmaneuvered, so they pretend it was their idea all along. Let them, I said, surprising myself with how little it bothered me now. As long as Grace knows the truth, as long as she remembers who she is and where she came from, that's all that matters to me. And it was true. The sting of being initially sidelined, of discovering my daughter was willing to minimize our relationship to please her in-laws, had faded in the wake of our reconciliation. What remained was a clearer understanding between us, a renewed appreciation for the bond we shared. As the evening progressed, I found myself genuinely enjoying the celebration. I danced with old friends, sampled the excellent wine I had personally selected from Meadowbrook's cellar, and watched with quiet pride as Grace moved through the reception, gracefully balancing her obligations as a bride with genuine moments of connection with her guests. At one point, I spotted her in deep conversation with Marcus, my estate manager, both of them laughing over something he had said. When she caught my eye across the room, she waved me over. "Mom," she said as I joined them, "Marcus has been telling me about your restoration of Meadowbrook. I had no idea you did so much of the work yourself." Marcus nodded. "Your mother personally selected every paint color, every fixture. She spent weeks researching historically accurate materials for the restoration. The gardens were completely redesigned under her direction. She'd be out there at dawn with the landscapers, determining the placement of every tree and shrub." Grace looked at me with new wonder. "Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this?" I considered the question carefully. "I suppose because Meadowbrook was something that was just mine. After so many years of being defined primarily as your mother, as Howard's ex-wife, I needed something that belonged solely to me. A place where I could create and build without anyone else's expectations or needs taking precedence." Understanding dawned in her eyes. Like how I'd escaped to the art studio in high school when everything felt too overwhelming at home. A space that was just mine, where I could be completely myself. "Exactly like that," I agreed, touched that. She remembered. Grace had shown early artistic talent, taking to painting with an intensity that had surprised us. Her high school art teacher had given her a key to the studio, allowing her to work there on weekends and during free periods. Those hours of solitary creativity had been sacred to her, something I had always respected, never intruding unless invited. "I get it now," she said softly. "Why you kept Meadowbrook separate from your identity as my mom. It wasn't about hiding something from me. It was about preserving something for yourself." "Yes," I said simply, "though I never imagined you'd end up getting married here without knowing it was mine." Grace laughed. "Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes." She looked around at the magnificent hall, taking in the carefully restored details, the perfectly balanced blend of historic character and modern comfort. "You created something really special here, Mom. I'm proud of you." Those 4 simple words, "I'm proud of you," touched me deeply. For so many years, the pride had flowed in only one direction, from me to Grace, celebrating her achievements, her growth, her becoming. To have that current reversed, to feel her genuine admiration for something I had built, felt like a gift I hadn't known I was waiting to receive. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by Ryan's younger sister, Emily, who appeared breathless, with excitement. "Grace, it's time for the bouquet toss. Everyone's waiting on the terrace." Grace smiled and squeezed my hand. "Duty calls." "But Mom, tonight, once all this is over and everyone has gone home, I'd love to hear more about how you saved Meadowbrook. The real story, not the sanitized version for wedding clients." "I'd like that," I replied. "Very much." As she moved away with Emily, Marcus turned to me with a knowing smile. "That went better than expected, didn't it? Your grand revelation." "Much better," I agreed, though I think we have Ryan to thank for some of that. He turned out to be more substantial than I gave him credit for. People often are, Marcus observed, when given the chance to rise to an occasion. I thought about that as I followed the crowd onto the terrace for the bouquet toss. How Grace had ultimately risen above her temporary lapse in judgment, choosing honesty and reconciliation over continued pretense. How Ryan had demonstrated unexpected character in supporting that choice, even when it meant challenging his parents' expectations. How Howard had finally acknowledged his own complicity in sidelining me and taken steps to correct it. People could surprise you if you gave them the chance, sometimes even yourself. The terrace was alive with laughter and conversation as the single women gathered for the bouquet toss. Grace stood at the top of the stone steps, her back to the assembled group, the bouquet of creamy roses and lilies of the valley held ready. I stood to the side with the other married guests, enjoying the timeless ritual. "Ready?" Grace called over her shoulder. 1, 2, 3. She tossed the bouquet high into the air, where it arced gracefully before descending toward the waiting hands below. There was a moment of good-natured scrambling, then a cheer as Emily caught it, her face flushing with delight as she held her prize aloft. The celebration continued, flowing seamlessly from one traditional moment to the next. The garter toss, more dancing, heartfelt conversations in quiet corners. Through it all, I remained present but unobtrusive, savoring my rightful place in the proceedings without needing to dominate them. This was still Grace's day, after all. My goal had never been to overshadow her joy, only to ensure our relationship was honored rather than obscured. As midnight approached, guests began to depart, offering warm congratulations to the newlyweds and effusive praise for the magnificent venue. Howard left with his current girlfriend, stopping to kiss Grace's cheek and, somewhat surprisingly, to embrace me briefly. "You did well, Merritt," he murmured. "With Meadowbrook, with Grace, with all of it." Coming from Howard, it was high praise indeed. The Matthews departed with appropriate fanfare, Linda managing a civil farewell to me that, while not warm, acknowledged my position as both Grace's mother and the owner of Meadowbrook. Progress, of a sort. Finally, only the immediate family and closest friends remained. Grace and Ryan had changed from their formal wedding attire into more comfortable clothes for the after-party, Grace in a simple white silk shift dress, Ryan in slacks and a cashmere sweater. They looked younger, more relaxed, the official ceremony behind them and their life together stretching ahead. "Mom," Grace called, waving me over to where she sat with Ryan on one of the terrace sofas. "Come sit with us. We're making plans for brunch tomorrow." I joined them, grateful for the chance to rest my feet after hours of standing and dancing. "What kind of plans?" "Well," Ryan said, "originally we were going to have brunch with just my parents at their hotel before leaving for our honeymoon. But we're thinking of changing that to a more inclusive gathering here at Meadowbrook. If that's possible," he added, looking to me. "Of course it's possible," I assured him. "Meadowbrook is yours through tomorrow evening. We can arrange a lovely brunch in the garden room. The morning light there is spectacular." "Perfect," Grace said, looking genuinely pleased. "That way, everyone can be included. You, Dad, Alex, and Sophia when they arrive from Chicago. Ryan's sister, his parents. She hesitated slightly on the last part, then continued more firmly. "Everyone who matters to us." I understood what she was trying to do. To create a more balanced family gathering where the Matthews wouldn't dominate, where our side of the family would be properly represented. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but a meaningful one. "I think that sounds wonderful," I said. Ryan stretched and yawned. "I should go check on my sister. Last I saw, she was teaching your friend Diane how to do tequila shots, which seemed like a disaster in the making." He kissed Grace's cheek and nodded politely to me before heading back into the main hall, leaving Grace and me alone on the terrace. The October night was crisp, but not uncomfortably cold, the sky clear and scattered with stars. Below us, Meadowbrooks. Gardens were still illuminated, the pathways marked by soft lighting that created pools of golden warmth amid the darkness. "It's so beautiful here," Grace said, looking out over the estate. "I can see why you fell in love with it." "It was nothing like this when I first saw it," I told her. The gardens were overgrown, the stonework crumbling, the roof literally falling in places. Most people thought I was crazy to take it on. "But you saw what it could be," she said. "You always do that. See the potential in things. In people, too." She turned to face me. "You saw it in me, even when I was being less than my best self." "You're my daughter," I said simply. "I've known who you are since before you drew your first breath." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are we okay, Mom? Really okay? After everything that happened?" I considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest. "We will be," I said finally. Relationships, even the closest ones, maybe especially those, go through challenges. Times when we disappoint each other, when we have to recalibrate our expectations and understandings. This was one of those times for us. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "I know that. And I never meant to upstage your wedding. I just couldn't bear to be erased from your story, especially by people who know nothing about what we've meant to each other." Grace nodded slowly. "I understand that now. And I'm grateful, in a way, that you forced the issue. Living with that lie, with the pretense that you were just some distant relative not worth acknowledging, it was eating me up inside, even though I tried to tell myself it was just for one day. Those just-for-one-day compromises have a way of becoming permanent, if we're not careful," I said. "Patterns get established, expectations set. Before you know it, you're living a life shaped by other people's values instead of your own." "Like Linda," Grace observed. "Ryan told me she comes from a working-class background, that she reinvented herself completely when she met his father. Now she's so trapped in that identity, in maintaining appearances, that she can't even acknowledge her real history." "Exactly," I said. "I didn't want that for you, or for us." Grace leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so familiar, so reminiscent of countless moments throughout her childhood, that my throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not letting me make that mistake, for reminding me who I am, where I come from, for loving me enough to fight for your place in my life, even when I was making it so difficult." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "That's what mothers do, sweetheart. The real ones, anyway. We don't give up on our children, even when they're being impossible. Especially then." We sat in comfortable silence while watching the stars, listening to the muted sounds of the after-party continuing inside. It was a moment of perfect peace, of reconnection after the storm of conflict we'd weathered. "So," Grace said eventually, a hint of mischief in her voice, "what other secrets are you keeping from me? Any other major properties I should know about? Are you secretly a duchess in some small European country? Do you have a long-lost twin sister I've never met?" I laughed, relieved to hear the return of her playful spirit. "No other secrets, I promise. Meadowbrook was my one big adventure outside of raising you and Alex." "Speaking of Alex," Grace said, "he's going to be furious he missed all this drama. You know how he loves a good family showdown. We'll give him the full dramatic reenactment. At brunch tomorrow," I promised. Though I doubt Linda Matthews will appreciate being portrayed with Alex's usual flair for the theatrical. Grace giggled, then grew more serious. "He was upset about the original seating arrangement too, you know. Called me last week and read me the riot act about how I was treating you. Said if I didn't fix it, he would make a scene at the wedding." She sighed. I should have listened to him. "Yes, well, your brother has always been more direct about his feelings than you are," I said. "Less worried about keeping the peace." "A family trait he gets from you," Grace pointed out. "You're not exactly known for backing down when something matters to you." "True enough," I acknowledged. "Though I like to think I've learned to pick my battles over the years." "And my wedding was a battle worth picking?" I met her gaze directly. "Your wedding wasn't the battle, Grace. The battle was for honesty, for the integrity of our relationship, for refusing to let social pressure dictate the terms of our family bond. That will always be worth fighting for, as far as I'm concerned." She nodded slowly. "I understand that now, and I won't forget it again." She glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably go find my husband. We've got an early flight tomorrow." "Bora Bora, right?" I asked, recalling the honeymoon destination she'd mentioned months ago. Grace nodded, then hesitated. Mom, there's something else you should know. About the honeymoon. Something in her tone made me pay closer attention. What is it? Ryan's parents offered to pay for it as their wedding gift to us. 5-star resort, private bungalow over the water, the works. I nodded, unsurprised. That's very generous of them. We turned it down, Grace said quietly. It didn't feel right, especially after everything that happened with the wedding planning. Accepting their money felt like giving them too much influence over our lives. I blinked in surprise. But Bora Bora is your dream honeymoon. You've been talking about it since you were in college. We're still going to Bora Bora, she assured me. Just not to the resort they chose. We found a smaller place, still beautiful but more in line with what we can afford ourselves. She smiled slightly. We want to start our marriage on our own terms, not beholden to anyone else's expectations or finances. The decision showed a maturity, an independence of spirit that filled me with quiet pride. I think that's very wise, I said. Building a life together on your own terms is the surest foundation for a strong marriage. We learned from watching you, Grace said simply. How you built your business, your life, this place, all on your own terms, according to your own vision. She stood and offered me her hand. Come on, let's go find Ryan and rescue Diane from whatever trouble she and Emily have gotten themselves into. As we walked back toward the warm light of the main hall, arm in arm, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. The wedding hadn't gone as originally planned, for any of us. There had been moments of tension, of confrontation, of painful truth-telling. But we had emerged on the other side with our relationship not just intact, but strengthened, clarified, renewed. And really, what more could a mother ask for on her daughter's wedding day than the gift of honest connection, of being seen and acknowledged for who she truly is, not just as a maternal figure, but as a whole person with her own identity, her own accomplishments, her own worth beyond the role of mother? As we rejoined the remaining guests, as Grace found Ryan and introduced him to old friends of mine he hadn't met during the main reception, as Diane regaled everyone with increasingly embellished versions of the day's events, I stood slightly, apart, savoring the moment. Meadowbrook had been my sanctuary, my creation, my private source of pride for 15 years. Now it had also become the setting for this pivotal moment in my relationship with Grace. A place where truth had prevailed over pretense, where our bond had been tested and ultimately reaffirmed. I couldn't have planned a more fitting convergence. Of my two greatest loves, this magnificent estate I had rescued from ruin, and my daughter, finding her way back to authenticity after a brief detour into social pretension. Some might call it poetic justice, the way events had unfolded. Grace attempting to minimize my presence at a venue I owned. The Matthews family treating me with condescension while unwittingly depending on my hospitality and vision. The ultimate revelation of my true role forcing a reckoning with reality that might otherwise have been conveniently avoided. But I preferred to see it simply as life's natural correction, a reminder that authenticity will eventually assert itself, that relationships built on honest foundations will ultimately withstand the pressure to conform to others' expectations. As the night wound down, as the last few guests departed and the staff began the quiet work of restoring order to Meadowbrook's elegant spaces, I found myself alone in the grand entrance hall. The wedding was over, its dramas played out, its joys celebrated. Tomorrow would bring the casual intimacy of family brunch, the bittersweet farewell as Grace and Ryan departed for their honeymoon, the return to normal life with its daily rhythms and routine challenges. But tonight, in this moment of solitary reflection, I allowed myself to fully absorb the significance of what had transpired. Not just the external events, but the internal shift in my relationship with Grace, in her understanding of herself, and her priorities, in the delicate balance of power among our extended family connections. Something had been healed here, something fundamental. And something new had begun. A more honest, more equal relationship between mother and daughter, woman to woman, with room for both connection and independence, for shared history and separate dreams. I walked slowly through the quiet hall, trailing my fingers along the ancient stone walls that had witnessed centuries of human drama, of joy and sorrow, of beginnings and endings, walls that I had saved, restored, given new life and purpose, walls that now held the memory of this day, this reckoning, this reconciliation. "Good night, Meadowbrook," I whispered to the silent space. "Thank you for being exactly what we all needed today." Then I stepped out into the crisp October night, ready to return to my lakeside cottage, to sleep deeply and dream of tomorrow's possibilities, secure in the knowledge that some bonds can never truly be broken, only tested, strengthened, and renewed. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and brilliant, sunlight streaming through the lakeside cottage windows and casting golden patterns across my quilt. For a moment, I lay still, allowing the memories of the previous day to settle around me like autumn leaves, vibrant, complex, beautiful in their own way. What had begun as a day of potential heartbreak had transformed into something unexpected, a renewal, a recalibration, a rediscovery of the bond between mother and daughter. I rose and made coffee, carrying my mug out to the small deck overlooking Lake Champlain. The water rippled with gentle waves catching the morning light. In a few hours, I would return to Meadowbrook for the family brunch Grace had arranged, a gathering that would include both sides of the family, a visual representation of the new balance we were all trying to find. My phone chimed with a text message. It was from Grace. "Morning, Mom. Just wanted to say I love you. See you at 11. Simple words, but they carried the weight of everything we'd navigated together. I typed back, "Love you too. Looking forward to it." I dressed with care, selecting a sage green dress that Grace had always said brought out the color of my eyes, and drove the familiar route to Meadowbrook. The estate looked different in the morning light, softer, more intimate, the gardens dewy and fresh after the night's festivities. Marcus greeted me at the side entrance, clipboard in hand as always. "Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy. Everything's set up in the garden room as requested. The catering staff arrived 30 minutes ago, and the first guests should be here within the hour." "Thank you, Marcus. And thank you for yesterday. I couldn't have managed it without you." He smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his usually reserved face. "It was my pleasure. Quite the most interesting wedding we've hosted at Meadowbrook. Let's hope today's brunch is considerably less dramatic," I replied with a small laugh. The garden room was Meadowbrook's most intimate space, a glass-walled conservatory that opened onto a private section of the formal gardens. Morning light poured through the windows, illuminating tables set with fresh linens and delicate china. Arrangements of local wildflowers and autumn foliage decorated each surface, complementing the rustic elegance of the space. I moved through the room, making small adjustments, straightening a napkin here, repositioning a centerpiece there. These familiar actions centered me, reconnected me to the physical space of Meadowbrook after the emotional whirlwind of the wedding. Grace and Ryan arrived first, looking refreshed despite the late night. Grace embraced me warmly, holding on a beat longer than usual. "The room looks beautiful, Mom," she said, stepping back to take it all in. "So much more us than the formal reception." "I thought you might prefer something more intimate for today," I replied. "A chance to actually speak with everyone before you leave." Ryan shook my hand, then, after a moment's hesitation, leaned in to kiss my cheek. "Thank you for hosting this, Mrs. Abernathy. It means a lot to Grace, to both of us." "Please call me Merritt," I said, "and you're very welcome." Other guests began to arrive. Howard with his girlfriend Patricia, Alex and his wife Sophia, just flown in from Chicago. Ryan's sister Emily, looking slightly worse for wear after her adventures with Diane. And finally, Richard and Linda Matthews, precisely on time and impeccably dressed. I watched Linda as she entered the garden room, noting the slight tightening around her mouth as she took in the setting. It was beautiful, but understated, emphasizing natural elegance over ostentation, quite different from the formal grandeur she had insisted upon for the wedding reception. Grace moved to greet her in-laws, Ryan at her side. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I observed the body language. Grace standing taller, more assured than she had been in Linda's presence before. Ryan with his hand supportively at the small of her back. Linda maintaining her social smile while her eyes darted around the room, registering who was present. Howard approached me, champagne flute in hand. "Mimosa?" he offered. "I think we've earned it after yesterday." I accepted the glass. "Careful, Howard. One might almost think you're being thoughtful." He chuckled. "Stranger things have happened, like you secretly owning the venue for our daughter's wedding." Touché. We clinked glasses and stood together companionably, watching as our children moved among the guests. Alex was regaling Emily and Sophia with what appeared to be a highly dramatized version of yesterday's events, complete with expansive gestures and exaggerated expressions. Grace was introducing Ryan's father to Diane, who was being uncharacteristically charming. "We did all right, didn't we?" Howard said quietly. "With them." I nodded, understanding he meant our children. "They're good people, despite our mistakes along the way." "Your mistakes were considerably fewer than mine," he acknowledged, surprising me again with his candor. "I wasn't there enough, for either of them." "No," I agreed, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "But you're here now. That counts for something." The brunch proceeded with a warmth and ease that contrasted sharply with the formality of the wedding. Conversation flowed freely as we all found seats around the large table, family boundaries blurring as people shifted to speak with different guests. Even Linda Matthews seemed to relax somewhat as the meal progressed, especially after her second mimosa. I observed her listening with apparent interest as Alex described his work in architectural preservation in Chicago, a field not far removed from my own restoration of Meadowbrook, though I doubted she made the connection. Halfway through the meal, Ryan tapped his glass for attention. "Grace and I want to thank all of you for being here today and for sharing our wedding celebration yesterday. Before we head off for our honeymoon this afternoon, we wanted to take a moment to properly acknowledge the people who've made our lives and our relationship possible." He turned to his parents first. "Mom, Dad, thank you for your support, your guidance, and yes, your occasionally overwhelming opinions." This drew a gentle laugh from the group, even from Linda herself. "You've always pushed me to reach higher, and that drive has served me well." Then he turned toward me, his expression warming. "Merritt, thank you for creating this incredible place where we could celebrate our marriage, and even more, for raising the remarkable woman I'm lucky enough to call my wife. The values you instilled in Grace, honesty, compassion, resilience, those are the foundations of who she is and why I fell in love with her." Grace reached for my hand across the table, her eyes bright with emotion. "Mom, I don't have adequate words to express what you've meant to me, what you continue to mean to me. But I hope you know that everything I am, everything I hope to be, begins with you." The simple sincerity of her words touched me deeply. This wasn't a public performance, not a social obligation fulfilled, but a genuine expression of love and gratitude. In many ways, it meant more than any formal recognition at the wedding could have. "I know," I said softly. "I've always known." After brunch, as Grace and Ryan prepared to leave for the airport, I walked with them to their car. The day had warmed considerably, the October sun bathing Meadowbrook's grounds in golden light. Grace hugged me tightly, whispering, "When we get back, I want the full tour of Meadowbrook. Every room, every story, everything you've created here. It's a date, I promised. Safe travels, sweetheart. Ryan shook my hand, then surprised me with a warm hug. Thank you again for everything. Take care of each other, I said simply. I stood in the driveway watching until their car disappeared around the bend in the road, feeling the familiar bittersweetness of farewell. Not an ending, just a pause in our ongoing story. When I turned back toward Meadowbrook, I found Linda, Matthews standing on the stone steps watching me. For a moment, we regarded each other in silence, two mothers who had just watched their children begin a new chapter together. Your daughter is quite remarkable, Linda said finally. You've done well with her. It wasn't quite an apology for her earlier treatment of me, but it was something, an acknowledgement perhaps of the reality she had tried so hard to minimize. Thank you, I replied. Ryan is a fine young man as well. They'll be good for each other, I think. She nodded, then glanced back at the magnificent building behind her. Meadowbrook is extraordinary. The restoration work, the attention to historical detail while accommodating modern needs. It's exceptionally well done. I accepted the compliment with a slight nod. It's been my passion project for 15 years. Mine was Richard's political career, she said, surprising me with the personal revelation. I've put everything into building the right connections, creating the right image, establishing the right foundation for his advancement. I understood then, with sudden clarity, that Linda's obsession with appearances, with social standing, wasn't merely vanity or snobbery. It was her life's work, her contribution, her measure of success, just as Meadowbrook was mine. We all find our purpose in different ways, I offered. Mine was in preserving beautiful things, in creating spaces where people can celebrate important moments. Yours in building a platform for your husband's ambitions. Yes, she agreed, seeming almost relieved by my understanding. Though perhaps I've become too rigid in my approach at times. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from Linda Matthews, and I accepted it as such. We all make mistakes when protecting what matters to us. We walked back into Meadowbrook together, an unexpected moment of accord between two women who would never be friends but who were now permanently connected through our children. It wasn't resolution exactly, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we might eventually build, if not friendship, then at least mutual respect. Later that evening, after all the guests had departed and Meadowbrook had been returned to its usual immaculate state, I stood alone in the garden room where we had shared brunch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, and in the quiet, I could almost hear echoes of the day's conversations, laughter, connections forged and renewed. My phone chimed with a message from Grace, a selfie of her and Ryan at the II airport, her eyes bright with excitement, his arm around her shoulders. Off on our adventure? Thank you for everything, Mom. I'll never forget what you did for us yesterday, for me. I smiled, typing back. Just being your mother as always. Fly safe. Love you. As I drove back to my cottage in the gathering dusk, I reflected on the journey of the past few days, from hurt and exclusion to reconciliation and renewed understanding. The road hadn't been straight or easy, but the destination had been worth every difficult step. Some mothers might have accepted the minor role assigned to them at their daughter's wedding, swallowing their hurt for the sake of peace. Others might have confronted the situation directly, demanding recognition regardless of the consequences. My path had been different, using my unique position as Meadowbrook's owner to ensure I couldn't be erased from my daughter's story, but doing so with a grace and restraint that ultimately preserved rather than damaged our relationship. It hadn't been about vengeance or even justice, really. It had been about truth. The truth of who we were to each other, of the journey we had taken together, of the bond that could bend but never break. As I reached my cottage and watched the last light fade over Lake Champlain, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to navigate in my relationship with Grace, with her new husband, with their extended family. But tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that what mattered most had been preserved. The authentic connection between a mother and daughter, tested by fire and emerging stronger for the trial. That was worth celebrating, worth protecting, worth fighting for. Always. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.